She never liked the color green. I remember once we argued over a tablecloth. She wrinkled her nose at the emerald shade. Repulsive. Like a hospital wall, she said. So I picked the beige one. Just to end the discussion. And now there's a scarf hanging in the hallway. Green. Velvet. Feminine. Not hers. But next to it, her coat. Her gloves. Her keys. I picked up the scarf. The tag bore someone else's name. And the scent, not her perfume. Sweet. Heavy. Cloying. She said she'd be at the gym tonight. I came home just to change. Coincidence? Sometimes it all starts with a color. I held that green scarf longer than I needed to. It was soft, almost defiantly expensive. Too heavy for such a delicate fabric, as if it carried someone else's story. The label read, Nika. Not her friend. Not her style. I twisted the scarf between my fingers. The smell was sickly sweet with an exotic undertone. I sneezed. On the shelf under the mirror lay her bracelet, the one she always takes off before a shower. But the shower was dry. No steam. Towel folded. She hadn't been to the gym. Not today. I stood in the hallway like a guest in my own life. Stepped into the room. The TV was off. A book lay open on the table, not hers. Masculine fiction. A stranger's bookmark. I wasn't searching. Not really. I was just trying to breathe. I checked the fridge. An empty wine bottle in the trash. Not the kind we buy. One glass. Lipstick on the rim. Coincidence? I left the apartment, the door slamming a little harder than I intended. On the way to the car, I rehearsed explanations. Maybe a friend. Maybe someone just forgot their scarf. Maybe she meant to tell me. Maybe. But another thought had already begun to scratch inside my chest. I stopped by the office to finish some work. 3 hours later, I was done. Opened my phone's GPS. Her location was still shared, something we set up for convenience. I never thought I'd open that tab with trembling fingers. Pin, 13th Street, House 14. That's not the gym. I drove there. Slowly. Calmly. As if I were picking up dry cleaning. 13th Street was quiet, lined with private homes. Tall fences. Elegant gates. Security cameras. One of the houses, gray with a terrace and garden, matched the pin. I parked around the corner. And waited. 15 minutes, maybe more. No sound. No movement. Just my own heartbeat, loud in my ears. Then the door opened. First, a man. Tall. In a coat. Carrying a folder. He got into a black car and drove off. A few minutes later, she came out. No gym bag. Wearing a green dress. Hair loose. And that green scarf. I sank into my seat. She turned as if she'd heard my pulse. Looked around. Didn't see me. Walked toward the metro. I stayed. In the car. Alone. With a question that had finally stopped being a question. Not a coincidence. I didn't follow her. Didn't call. Didn't write. I just went home. Sat on the couch. The dusty fox on the shelf stared at me as if asking, "Are you ready to know more?" I didn't know. But I was already heading to a place you can't come back from. And it all started with a scarf, the color she once hated. That was 2 weeks ago. I was in session with one of my duller patients. He said, "I feel calmer in that cafe on the corner, the one that always smells like sandalwood. You probably know it, the one with the old piano by the window." I froze. Sandalwood. Piano. That was our place. The cafe we went to on Sundays. Where she first said she wanted children. Where she cried the day her father died. None of my patients had ever been there. I'd never mentioned it in any session. I bit the inside of my cheek. My pulse skipped. "Sorry, could you repeat that?" My voice was flat. Smooth as glass. He repeated it. Slowly. As if tasting the words. It could have been a coincidence. Sure. The cafe is popular. Maybe a friend brought him there. A wife. Or someone else. He didn't say a name. But I felt it under the skin like electricity. This wasn't random. I couldn't let go of that detail. Even after he left. Even after I closed the door and sat back down, the thought stuck like sand in my throat. I opened his file. No address overlap. No familiar places. He lived on the other side of the city. No mention of this neighborhood. No coincidences. The next day, I looked at her differently. She spoke about reports, exhaustion. I nodded, but my gaze moved over her like x-rays. A faint tan line on her wrist. She had taken off her watch. She never does. Why now? Where had she been? I didn't ask. But something inside had shifted. I began rewatching my session recordings. Listening not to Jake, but to her. And the phrases floated back. About the loneliness in marriage. The feeling of being heard but not truly listened to. He'd said the same things, almost word for word. That night, I said, "Do you want to go there, to the cafe? Like we used to?" She froze. Just for a second. Then nodded. Sure. But her voice was hollow, like she was agreeing out of obligation. And her eyes, they held no warmth. No memory. No sandalwood. No music. Just consent. I told myself, you're imagining things. You're tired. Too many sessions. Too many minds that aren't your own. But something in me no longer believed it. And I asked myself, what if it's not a coincidence? Do you know Jake? I asked casually between sips of tea. Tried to make it sound offhand like the name had just slipped out. She looked up and laughed. Too quickly. The laugh was clear, almost sincere, if not for her hands. They were resting in her lap, and they clenched into fists. Just for a moment. No, she said. Don't think so. Then she kept eating like the question meant nothing. I smiled too. Nodded. But inside everything knotted tight. Laughter can be a shield. Or a reflex. I didn't eat after that. I just watched her chew. And thought about how easily she lied. If it was a lie. If I wasn't inventing it all myself. That night I didn't sleep. I lay with my eyes open, listening to her breathe. Even. Steady. Like someone with nothing to hide. I turned toward her phone on the nightstand. It was locked. But I swiped out of instinct. Nothing. No messages. No photos. No browser history. Clean. Perfectly wiped. Not just a phone. A mask. Something inside me snapped. Sweat gathered on my back, though the room was cool. I never wanted to be someone who checks. Who digs? But I already was. I walked to the kitchen. Poured a glass of water. Braced myself against the counter. And looked again at the shelf. The ceramic fox was still there. But it seemed to be looking the other way now. I used to feel warm from it. Now something distant. Its sharp ears. The cold glint in its eyes. I thought, maybe there's still time to believe. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just stress. Maybe Jake really is just a patient. But she said, don't think so. You can forget a name. But a cafe? The phrasing? The tone? Coincidence doesn't come that clean. I put her phone back. And realized. The cleaner the surface, the more terrifying what lies beneath. She'd started sleeping on the edge of the bed. She didn't leave. She didn't say no. She was just farther. 5 centimeters. Then 10. Then half a meter. I caught myself doing something strange. At night, I listened. Not to her words. To her breathing. When we were happy, she breathed lightly, a little loudly, almost purred in her sleep. Now her breathing was even. Controlled. Like someone making sure they sound asleep. Not dreaming. Not relaxed. One night, I woke up and realized I wasn't sure if she was still there. I turned my head but didn't touch her. Just listened. The room was dark. The bedside lamp off. The silence was suffocating. My heart pounded like a teenager about to confess. I was a therapist. I knew what distance meant. But this. I didn't feel as a professional. I felt it in my skin. In my bones. In the silence between her breaths. I began keeping notes. Like I do with patients. Date. Time. Observation. Went to bed at 11:41 p.m. Turned away. Didn't reply to good night. Held her phone face down. Different perfume again. Hands trembled while wiping the table for the first time. I didn't know why I was doing it. Maybe to keep a grip on logic. To stop myself from falling. In these notes, I felt power. Even if it was imaginary. Cold but clear. When emotion breaks down, structure becomes a shelter. She started touching me less. Where she once would place a hand on my shoulder in passing, now she simply passed. No glance. No word. I looked at my hands. She once said she loved my fingers like a pianist's. Now they just lay there on the table. Lifeless. Foreign. As if they no longer belonged to her. I remembered how she laughed at my first article. Laughed so hard tears ran down her cheeks. That was joy. Real joy. Now. I left a copy of the article next to the laptop. In plain sight. 3 days. Not a word. Not even a glance. Maybe she didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't want to. I looked at the fox. I wiped it every day now. Not for her. For me. As if trying to say, I remember who we were. But now it feels like a monument. Small. Ceramic. A kind of grave. In one of Jake's sessions, he said, you shouldn't be ashamed of your pain. Calmly. Confidently. I looked up from my notebook. That's my line. Mine. I've said it dozens of times. Wrote it in articles. Lectured on it. But now it was coming from his mouth. As if he were quoting me. Not as if he was quoting me. I tried to keep my breathing steady. He sat across from me, relaxed, smiling slightly. Like he was playing. My fingers twitched slightly. I didn't write down the line. Just noted it in my head, overlap with my phrasing. But my heart was already sounding alarms. He couldn't know it. Not unless. Her voice in the bathroom. The wiped phone. Her smile when I mentioned the cafe. I didn't ask. I didn't stop the session. I just started listening differently. From that day, I didn't hear him as a patient anymore. I was looking for evidence. For clues. For tones, cadences, mimicry. He said, sometimes she just goes quiet. And in that silence, there's more anger than in shouting. That too was mine. Almost word for word. I left the office not for home for the first time, but to a tech store. I told the clerk I needed a tracker. For a car. For safety. He nodded. Smiled. Didn't ask questions. The next day, she said she had a presentation. I activated the listening device. At first, street noise. The radio. Silence. Then, a voice. His. And hers. Laughter. Easy. Unburdened. As if she was someone else. He used my phrases again. You don't have to forgive betrayal. Pain isn't weakness. It's a map. And she answered him like they shared those words. As if they created them together. As if I didn't exist. A migraine hit. Sharp. Pulsing. Like a flash in the dark. I sat in silence. Their laughter in my headphones. And I understood. I no longer existed in this story. They were using my tools. My language. My rules. Against me. I don't remember getting home. But in the hallway I saw dust on the Fox and pulled it from the shelf. I didn't smash it. I just held it. Watched the dust settle into its tiny cracks. I whispered. They're quoting me. And I squeezed the Fox so tightly I felt the ceramic strain. I scheduled another session with him. Officially just continuation of therapy. Nothing unusual. He arrived on time. Sat down just like always, relaxed but with a straight spine. He smiled. But there was something different in the smile. Not kindness. Not respect. More like challenge. I sat across from him. The pen trembled in my fingers. Not from fear. From the pressure building over weeks. He broke the silence first. Thanks for finding time. I know it wasn't easy to fit me in. Neutral tone. But beneath it, a hint of mockery. Like he knew that I knew. I replied evenly. Sometimes the timing matters more than the schedule. He nodded. Held my gaze. Too directly. I started with something simple. How have you been feeling this week? He shrugged. Steady. Although, sometimes I get this strange sense that someone's watching me. He said it looking straight at me. I didn't blink. Just wrote down, feeling of being watched, track paranoia development. Though I knew it wasn't about him. It was a message. He spoke about the fear of being exposed. About how shame can feel almost arousing. How easy it is to disguise truth as honesty if you know where to press. I didn't interrupt. I listened. But inside, my pulse ticked like a metronome. Every word sounded like rehearsal. Like he was testing my reactions. Comparing them. And then he said, Claire is a strong woman. For the first time a name. For the first time open. I said nothing. Just smiled. He waited. I nodded and answered. You often talk about strong women. Why? He dropped his gaze. Just for a second. Then said, because the weak ones are afraid to look in the mirror. Under the table, my fingers curled into a fist. I felt my nails press into my palm. But my face calm. The session ended on the dot. He left. No pause. No glance back. I stayed in the room. Closed the door. And exhaled. Not into silence, but into emptiness. The Fox sat on the windowsill. I turned it to face the door. Let it watch. Her voice came through the headphones. Clear. Confident. Unashamed. He still hasn't figured it out, she said. I stood in the hallway. In the dark. Alone. The screen showed waves of signal. In my ear, laughter. Hers. His. And inside, ringing silence. I thought that hearing the truth would bring shock. Rage. A scream. But it was different. Like someone had turned off the light inside me. And I was watching myself from the outside. Her voice, once familiar, once beloved, now sounded like a stranger's. He said, he's holding on. Thinks he's still in control. And she laughed. Warmly. Freely. The way she used to laugh with me. Now with him. In another apartment. Another life. It wasn't just betrayal. It was strategy. A conspiracy. Cold. Precise. Coordinated. I heard them talking about my work. My articles. How she said. He still thinks his lectures matter. but even Jake uses them better. I pressed the earbud harder as if that could silence the sound. But it was too late. Everything had already been said. Everything had already been heard. He asked, "You think he'll break?" And she answered, "He doesn't know how to break. He just disappears." I stood outside his door. Under his window. Darkness. Wind. Cold biting at my fingers. But I felt nothing. Everything was slowed down. I was the observer. Not the husband. Not the therapist. Just a point in space erased from the equation. A day before, she had hugged me. Out of nowhere. In the morning before work. She said, "I miss us." And I believed her. Almost cried. Thought, maybe there's still a chance. Maybe we still. And now the night. A stranger's window. Stranger's words. And a woman who once was mine saying my name in someone else's voice. This wasn't just infidelity. It was theater. And I was both the audience and the target. I said, "I understand everything. And I forgive." The words came easily. No tremble. No performance. She froze. Looked at me as if waiting for a trap. But there wasn't one. There was silence. There was tea on the table. And me calm. Inside, nothing. Not pain. Not anger. Just a white, scorched landscape. Like the aftermath of fire. That night I wrote a letter. To the ethics committee. Anonymous. About Jake. About the boundary violations. The manipulation. The use of personal knowledge. I didn't sign my name. But I knew if they wanted to find me, they could. Let them. And then something happened that I hadn't planned. The fox. Fell from the shelf. A dull, brittle sound. She turned her head. Looked. And kept walking. In the morning I woke early. Light just beginning to seep through the curtains. Shards on the floor. The fox's face intact. But the tail cracked. I didn't pick it up. Just sat and looked. She walked past. Glanced. Said nothing. Didn't even slow her step. That was worse than any scream. Worse than betrayal. Worse than the words, "I love him." It was absence. And I thought, how easily she erased the symbol. Something we chose together. Something she touched every day. Now just trash on the floor. Later, she came home early. Cooked dinner. Pretended nothing had happened. Talked about coworkers. The weather. I nodded. Watched her. And thought, you think I've withdrawn. That I'm fading. But in truth I'm observing. The letter is sent. The recording's saved. Sessions. Audio. Logs. Not for court. Not for revenge. For memory. So I have the text. The document. The proof that I was here. That I saw everything. She went to bed early. I stayed in the kitchen. Sat by the window. Picked up one shard of the fox small with the edge of an ear. Held it between my fingers. It was sharp. But it didn't cut. Like a reminder. I whispered. Now it's my turn. I used to think betrayal was an event. A kiss. A lie. A night. But now I know it's not an explosion. It's erosion. Drop by drop. Pause by pause. You don't disappear in someone else's eyes. You disappear from your own life. I sat in my empty office. The smell of coffee gone cold. The tick of the clock. No calls. No patience. Everything canceled. On the wall, a diploma. Beside it, a photo from my first conference. I'm standing there with her. She's holding my hand. Now it feels like a stranger is looking out from that photograph. And I realized I wasn't a therapist. I was the material. The matrix. The source. And they were playing together. I went back through the details. Not to accuse, but to reconstruct. Like someone rebuilding their face from fractured reflections after amnesia. When did it begin? With the cafe? The perfume? The silence? No. Earlier. When she started using my words. When his voice became a mirror. When my style became their script. He didn't come to be healed. He came to study. He was learning me. Learning how I think. How I lead a conversation. And then he used it. With her. She listened to me at night. And quoted me by day. To him. And I didn't notice. I took pride in her attention. I was glad she read my work. But she was just copying. Memorizing. Passing it on. I wasn't a man in their story. I was a function. A reference. An instructional guide. And the more I thought about it, the less I felt. Not pain. Not rage. Just clarity. Like a body rising out of murky water. Your own body. Now I know. I wasn't betrayed in a single moment. I was rewritten slowly. Delicately. Tell me how you sleep, I asked. He looked up. Smiled. Calm. Confident. as if everything was still under his control, as if I was still in the dark. But between us, the fox. I placed it on the table, identical to the one that broke. Ceramic. Smiling. Sharp. He noticed. Asked. New. I nodded. Just a reminder. He didn't understand. And that was good. I returned to the office. Quietly. Slowly. Not for work. For observation. Jake continued his sessions. Thought everything was the same. That he still had me fooled. That I was still in the shadow. But now I listened differently. I no longer documented symptoms. I studied his language. The way he paused. How he dodged topics. How his tone shifted when he said loss of control. He didn't notice. He thought he'd won. But now every response is material. Every glance a tool. I began guiding him just enough to make him doubt. Himself. Her. What they had. I planted questions. Uncertainty. Loops. He doesn't notice. Not yet. But in time, he'll begin to lose his bearings. Not because I want revenge, but because I know how to lead someone to the mirror, where it doesn't lie. Claire no longer tries to hide anything. She lives near me like a guest, tries to revive the routine, but I'm no longer part of her script. I'm outside their play. I'm directing a new one. I didn't destroy them. I simply stopped being their resource. One day, he said during a session, "Sometimes I feel like I'm losing the thread." I nodded and replied, "Maybe you never held it." He fell silent for a long time, looked at the fox, smiled. So did I. Sometimes the best way to destroy a manipulator is to let him think everything is going to plan, while you simply hold up the mirror.